I just wanted to give a refresher how to commit to ThinEdge, just in case if there's some people who are maybe not familiar with contributing to open source projects on GitHub. So there are a few kind of variants. So let me just share. So in ThinEdge, this is the main project. So everyone's probably familiar with that, has probably kind of, poked around there a little bit or created an issue. This is where all of the source code to the core ThinEdge product is. So all of the Rust code, the system tests, the current documentation, but I'll get into that shortly. So that's kind of like the entry point to the main core things. There's a lot of additional plugins. So all additional plugins that do some, like the container plugin or anything, there will be in separate repositories. Otherwise, it would be a big mess because there's, an ever-growing number of kind of external plugins. But this is where the core project is. So we work on a fork model. So this means not even the ThinEdge team members create branches on this project. So the reason for that is in a distributed project, so if you have multiple people working on it, it can get very, very hard to control if there's multiple people always creating branches everywhere, and it's not, people can use it, but we decide not because it gets a little bit of a mess, because you also see here, like the branches number, that will go absolutely crazy. So that will be like, 500 different branches if you don't do cleanup of the branches and stuff. So if you want to commit to the project, all it requires is one additional step before, you probably would go, if I want to check out the code or something, you'd click on, the classic GitHub code, and I can decide, how to clone my project. Before you do this step, all you need to do is hit that fork button. And then that will fork onto your kind of GitHub user ID. And so I've already done this for myself. So see here, this is a fork, like my fork that I code off for the ThinEdge project. So you can track who, where did you fork this from? So this isn't, I didn't create this project. So you always keep that reference. And I can see, so I can easily, go back to the upstream project. So ThinEdge is then in this context called the upstream project. So it just basically means, where did I get the code from? And if I want to contribute a change back to the project, you'd contribute it back to the upstream. So now with this, I can then clone my project locally. I do not need any permissions from the ThinEdge repository to do any coding changes here. I can create a million different branches. That's fine. I mean, it's your fork. You're kind of now in ownership of this. So you can see here, I haven't been very clean with some of my branch cleanup, and I have 152 open branches. So it's based on your permissions, because in this context, it is your repository. So if you want to do contribute then like a change back to the project, it would just involve then checking out this project, creating a branch, and then creating a PR. So I'll go through that shortly. But maybe one thing. So once you create a fork is you're forking a project at a specific point in time. Obviously, between when you fork it, the ThinEdge, we have a whole team working on ThinEdge, further development. We're continuously doing commits. So your fork will be out of sync at some point in time. GitHub makes this really easy. You can do command lines as well and, do git commands to do this. But sometimes, it pays to go into the UI just to have a kind of poke around to see it visually, because sometimes, humans can kind of understand that a little bit better. And you can see, how behind is my fork? So if you're on the main branch of your fork, you just need to click this sync fork button. And then if you're not in sync, so if your main branch is behind like the upstream project, you'll just have a button that says sync fork. And then you could hit that once, and then your now fork is then up to date with the main. So the main branch is the only one that you really need to sync, because your branches, you can do whatever you want with them. So it's mainly don't change anything on the main branch, because then you're kind of like creating your own kind of divergent branch, which gets a little bit confusing. So treat main as basically a read-only kind of branch, or at least I can only advise that. And then it makes it easier just to keep your, a copy of the upstream in sync. So let's, to kind of showcase the point, is to maybe show how to do like a documentation change. So if I'm on the documentation website and I notice there's something wrong, so the first point is, where do I notice something wrong? Or what version do I notice something is wrong? So with our documentation, we have two versions of it. The current, which is everything you see in the main branch, that is called the next. So that's basically anything that's happened since the last official release, because we're doing, again, changes which also could include documenting new features and stuff, or just, general fixes. So that always comes in on the next kind of version. But when we do an official release, we snapshot. So we take a full copy of all of the documentation from the main branch at the time when we create the version and copy it across. So we have a independent, frozen version that doesn't change over time. Because imagine if we didn't do this, when we do further development, if we're suddenly changing documented features of 1.5 that don't exist yet, that would be super confusing for users. So when you're going, let's take an example of, I know there's I don't like the wording here for whatever reason, that it's confusing to me. So you're going, okay, I know I can make that better to make sure it's not as confusing. I want to then find that in the project. So I'm on the next, so I know where this should be on the main branch. So it's not a frozen snapshot, because the frozen snapshot doesn't actually live in the thin edge repository. So we're only interested, see if I want to make a commit, like a change to it, we want to look at the next version, which is kind of, the main branch. And then I want to submit a PR for this. So the easiest way to do this is, so I've already checked out the project, is to use the IDE, so you're in text editor search function. So look for a unique string, because finding it, through the install path, you could do that, but it's a lot more confusing, in my opinion. Whereas, the likelihood that a unique string occurs more than once is pretty unlikely. So usually you can pick something fairly unique. And here I found it already. So this is the project. I'm on a different branch at the moment. Sorry, yeah, because I'm doing some other kind of development. But if I wanted to then change the text here, going, let's just go, it's actually only an install or whatever, then you can do the change here. So I'm doing the change. I can see like the normal Git kind of tooling that you have in whatever kind of preferred text editor you have. So I'm using VS Code here, but it works exactly the same in all other kind of applications. Then you do your change as like any kind of Git project, it's on a branch, and then I want to create it. So you do your commits, be nice with your commit messages. And then when it comes to creating a PR, there's multiple ways to do this. So in VS Code, if you have the GitHub extension installed, you can even do that conveniently from here and say create PR, and then you can do it convenient from there. Or if you prefer, you can actually, so if you push your branch, so where was I? Let's go to my fork. So if you created a new branch and pushed a change to there, GitHub usually then shows at the top like this yellow thing saying, hey, there's some uncommitted change, or sorry, there's a new branch here. Do you want to create a pull request to the upstream project? Because this is like the standard way that people kind of contribute to open source projects. Everyone forks it and then going, hey, do you want to contribute to upstream? Technically, you don't have to, but obviously, we're kind of relying on people to contribute to the project to make it all over a better product in the end. And that could also just be documentation, new features, or whatever. It's very open. And that's it. So once it goes to the PR process, I can quickly go here. We will see it in the PR list, and you will see, like, you can then browse to the main project or the upstream project, and then see your created PR here. And you can track it. So if we'll do a review and maybe give a bit of feedback and do some code suggestions. So we then you ping the PR team. So the Thin-Edge team gets pinged from the PR when it's created, and we'll interact with you via the PR. So there's very rich tooling in there that we can give comments for particular lines of code. So here going, what did you mean by this, etc. And then you can start a conversation also in context of different things. Is that more or less clear? I know, or who has committed to an open source GitHub project before and used this forking model? Some people? No? Okay. Christian, was that a question or you're putting up that you have?
Yeah, I just was raising my hand, so I have done it before for the Common-Lost UI project. So they also, if you have any bug fix, this kind of approach that you also have to fork it and then raise a PR from your fork.
Yeah, exactly. So because the forking model because you can't then add write permissions to everyone in the world who wants to contribute to your project. So the forking model is really great because you don't need to trust everyone. The trust is then established when you create a PR, and then you can review the PR. And we have our CI runner that takes the PR. We need to approve the run because it's using credentials, against the Common-Velocity instance. So you won't be blindly able to run, stuff that you shouldn't be able to run. But it's all part of the review process. So with the documentation, just to expand on where our documentation snapshots are, because I mentioned that there's two versions, or there can be multiple versions of the documentation. So the next version, which is always what we've committed to main, and that documentation gets published as soon as we merge to main. 2 minutes after, you will see that live on the next branch in the docs. You might be going, well, where is the other docs? So that version snapshot, because maybe there is such a stupid typo that's made it in the snapshot version, and you want to maybe suggest to us, hey, can you maybe fix that also in the snapshot versions? So I would probably approach that scenario with just create a ticket in the main repository to saying, hey, I noticed this version. To limit confusion, please backport the docs, because at time to time, we also backport the docs and doc fixes to the snapshotted version. But if you wanted to, I don't know, maybe do that yourself, or had a comment on the docs, like that snapshot version, or maybe something with the documentation, how it's rendered or something like that, you can actually find the project that we use to render, display the documents in our repositories under the Thin-Edge organization. If I just do a tech docs here. So this is all of the JavaScript. So we're using Dockersaurus to generate our documentation. So the documentation, you might have noticed, it's not just static Markdown. There's also rich elements in there, which display code snippets that do automatic translations. There's a browser viewer window. So I don't know if anyone's seen some of the improvements that we've done. Obviously not there. Let's go here. Never find the page when you actually want it. Connected to Common-Velocity. Okay, I can't seem to find it. Give me a sec. Common-Velocity, let's go configuration management. Oh, here. So for example, about 2 weeks ago, we updated all of our screenshots, and then we added a nice banner here. So it's not just a dumb, here's the image, because that just doesn't look very nice. So we do some additional rendering to make this a little bit more readable, understandable, and all these functions. So all of these tooling and rendering stuff is stored in the TED docs. So this will have all like the JavaScript or like the React components that we use for rendering stuff all in here, and including the version snapshot that we take at the last, official version. So here in the version docs, I can see that's the version 1.5.1. So that was our last official release. And it's kind of like a rolling. We only show the last kind of official release and then the main branch. That you can also see just to maybe confirm your assumptions that is something wrong in this version snapshot. And then, by all means, create a ticket to then show us, hey, can you please backport this? Because, you've had a lot of customer complaints about it and whatever, then we're more than happy to spend the effort to backport fixes. So, but you can also have a poke around and look at some of the components that we use there, like the browser window, or, we have that user context form, which adds, so if I'm connecting here, that this is actually rendered and does a little bit of magic. So all of my commands get updated in my context here. So we can kind of extend this and be freeform. So if there's stuff that we want to, and this is saved in your session cache and like your session, you call it session cache, whatever, your persistent session storage on the browser. So you can also do change it into your context. So I think that was done like a year and a half ago or something. But we're more than happy to also accept those kinds of PRs. So if it's kind of like functionality changes to make it even more usable or cooler or whatever, then those kinds of that would be more part of the documentation framework, which would then be in the TED docs. But generally for content, it will always be the main project that we want to do that. But also if you're not sure, by all means ask us. That could also be in the form of an issue, or if you're internal comm velocity, we have a comm velocity, a Thinage user space in Google Chat or on Discord for public users. We're more than happy to help you, direct you to where should you create it, because I know we have a lot of repositories, so over 70. So it can be a little bit confusing where, what is responsible for this kind of artifact, where do I create the ticket to? So just reach out to us and we can happily answer that. Cool. Yeah, I think that was the main points. We also have a bit of, just for if you have some writing documentation, we try to document some of the components you can use and stuff. So there is definitely help there, and also good, bad, how you should write Markdown, or at least our kind of preferred styling and all that kind of things. Yeah, so that can also be improved if necessary. Cool. Then that concludes our demo for today. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.